everyone. So our webinar topic for this day is about importance of the reef ecosystem. By the way, I am Felix Balquin, a Coastal Extension Officer from DENR PENRO-Guimaras. So our presentation outline would be composition of the reef ecosystem, types of reef, threats to reef, monitoring of reefs, and initiatives to save the reefs. Okay, so as we all know, a coral reef is an underwater ecosystem characterized by reef building corals. When we say reef building corals, these are hard corals. Reefs are formed of colonies of coral polyps held together by calcium carbonate. Coral polyps, the animals primarily responsible for building reefs, can take many forms: large reef building colonies, graceful flowing fans, and even small solitary organisms. They are most commonly found at shallow depths in tropical waters, but deep water and cold water coral reefs exist on smaller scales in other areas. Because of the diversity of life found in the habitats created by corals, reefs are often called the rainforest of the sea. Okay? About 25% of the ocean's fish depend on healthy coral reefs. Fishes and other organisms shelter, find food, reproduce, and rear their young in the many nooks and crannies formed by corals. Shallow water reef building corals have a symbiotic relationship with photosynthetic algae called zooxanthellae. So that's how it is looked in a microscope, which live in their tissues. The coral provides a protective environment and the compound zooxanthellae need for photosynthesis. In return, the algae produce carbohydrates that the coral uses for food as well as oxygen. The algae also help the coral remove waste. Since both partners benefit from association, this type of symbiosis is called mutualism. Now that we know the basic about the composition of a reef ecosystem, we now go to the types of reefs. The most common type of reef is a fringing reef. This type of reef grows seaward directly from the shore. They form borders along the shoreline and surrounding islands. This is the type of reef that we have here in the Philippines or in Taklong Island National Marine Reserve. Also, we have here the barrier reef. Barrier reefs, on the other hand, are similar to fringing reefs in that they also border a shoreline. However, instead of growing directly out from the shore, they are separated from land by an expanse of water. This creates a lagoon of open, often deep water between the reef and the shore. Another one is the atoll reef. When a fringing reef continues to grow upward from a volcanic island that has sunk entirely below sea level, an atoll is formed. And atolls are usually circular or oval in shape with an open lagoon in the center. Kindly take a look of some photos making examples of the types of reef. This is the type of reef taken by drone in Rojas City. This is the famous Great Barrier Reef in Australia. And now we go to the threats to coral reefs. According to the study made by Freire and this company in 2013, coral reefs are in decline in the US and around the world, and many scientists now believe that the very existence of coral reefs may be in jeopardy unless we intensify our efforts to protect them. Be informed that threats to coral reefs come from both local and global sources. For local threats, we have here physical damage or destruction. Okay? From the coastal development, dredging, quarrying, destructive fishing practices and gear, both anchors and groundings, and recreational misuse, for example, touching or removing corals. We also have pollution that originates on land but finds its way into coastal waters. There are many types and sources of pollution from land based activities. For example, sedimentation, as you can see in the picture, from coastal development, urban stormwater runoff, forestry, and agriculture, sedimentation has been identified as a primary stressor for the existence and recovery of coral species and their habitats. Sediment deposited onto reefs can smother corals and interfere with their ability to feed, grow, and reproduce. Pathogens from inadequately treated sewage, storm water, and runoff from livestock pens, although rare bacteria and parasites from fecal contamination can cause disease in corals, especially if they are stressed by other environmental conditions. Coral disease occurs in healthy ecosystems, but the input of pathogen-containing pollution can exacerbate the frequency and intensity of disease outbreaks. Another thing is toxic substances, including metals, organic chemicals, and pesticides found in industrial discharges, sunscreens, urban and agricultural runoff, mining activities, and runoff from landfills. Do you know that pesticides can affect coral reproduction, growth, and other physiological processes? Herbicides, in particular, can affect the symbiotic algae in a coral. This can damage their partnership with coral and result in bleaching. Yun po yung pumuputing corals na napapansin natin. When a coral turns into a white color, it means it just died. Okay? It will be covered with algae as time passes. So PCBs, oxybenzone and dioxin, are suspected of affecting coral reproduction, growth rate, feeding, and defensive responses. And the most famous local threat we have here, trash and microplastics from improper disposal and storm water runoff. Trash, such as plastic bags, bottles, and discarded fishing gear that makes its way into the ocean or into the sea can snag on corals and block the sunlight needed for photosynthesis or entangle and kill reef organisms and break or damage corals. Degraded plastics, on the other hand, and microplastics, those are examples of soap. Plastic, for example, can be consumed by coral, fish, sea turtles because they mistaken it as jellyfish and other reef animals, blocking their digestive tracts and potentially introducing toxic. Another local threat is overfishing. Okay? Overfishing can alter food web structure and cause cascading effects such as reproducing the numbers of grazing fish that keep corals clean of algae overgrowth. Blast fishing can cause physical damage to corals as well. Another thing is, or another form of local threat is coral harvesting for the aquarium trade, jewelry, and curious can lead to overharvesting of specific species, destruction of reef habitat, and reduced biodiversity. The aggregate effect of these stressors can decrease resilience of the reef overall and increase susceptibility to disease and invasive species. Invasive species can create an imbalance in the biological checks and balances of a reef ecosystem. When we say global threat, we are seeing it as a globally wide kind of threat for coral reefs. For example, increased in ocean temperatures and changing ocean chemistry are the greatest global threats to coral reef ecosystem. These threats are caused by warmer atmospheric temperatures and increasing levels of carbon dioxide in seawater. As atmospheric temperature rise, so do seawater temperature. This warming causes corals to lose the microscopic algae that produce food that corals need, placing stress on the corals. Without this algae, coral also lose their coloration, a condition known once again as, yes, coral bleaching, because the loss of algae reveals the white color of the calcium carbonate structure underlying the polyp. Severe or prolonged bleaching can kill coral colonies or leave them more vulnerable to other threats such as infectious diseases. As you can see here in the picture, the white color is the picture of the coral that has just died. The dirty white on the left upper portion is being taken over by algae, and then the live coral, or the part of the coral, which is still alive, is in the lower right portion, which is a kind of gray. Okay. Another global threat that we have here is, of course, the most famous ocean acidification. Refers to a change in ocean chemistry in response to the uptake of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is in equilibrium with that in seawater. So when atmospheric concentrations increase, so do oceanic temperature or concentrations. Carbon dioxide entering seawater reacts to form carbonic acid, causing an increase in acidity. In fact, each year, the ocean absorbs one quarter or about one quarter of the carbon dioxide emitted from the burning of fossil fuels. For example, are the oil, coal, and natural gas. Since the Industrial Revolution, ocean acidity has increased by about 30%, a rate that is more than 10 times what has previously occurred for millions of years. Further, ocean acidity levels are expected to increase by an additional 40% of our present levels by the end of this century. Now that we are aware of the global and the common local threats on our reef ecosystem, let's now understand and be informed on how we can monitor the health of a reef ecosystem. So, as we discussed earlier, coral reefs are exceptionally biodiverse and human dependence on their ecosystem services is high. Reefs experience significant direct and indirect anthropogenic pressures and provide a sensitive indicator of coastal ocean health, climate change, and ocean acidification, with associated implications for society. Monitoring coral reef status and trend is essential to better inform science, management, and policy. That's why mapping coral reef areas is essential first step to management and can be done with a range of techniques. Habitat maps can be made using maps of the area, local knowledge, and mantatos for broad-scale surveys or snorkel or scuba transects for medium-scale surveys to confirm the location of major habitat types. So the mapping and site selection methods we have is Mandato survey, video toad survey, and random swim. When we talk about Mandato, this involves towing a snorkeler behind a boat at a constant speed with regular stops to record data. This is the best method to obtain a general description of large reef areas or measures a broad changes in abundance and distribution of organisms and large-scale disturbances, for example, from a typhoon, cyclone, crown of thorns, or bleaching. This method is good for variables seen over long distance and for site selection. Mandato can be used to monitor changes in coral cover, determine abundance of impacts such as bleaching and disease, count giant clams or crown of thorns. Video tour, video tour diver. This method involves towing of two scuba divers behind a boat at a constant speed of about 1.5 knots. One diver maneuvers the benthic tow board or the mandato board, equipped with either a downward facing video camera or a still camera to photograph the bentos, no, at selected intervals. The other diver, on the other hand, maneuvers the fish tow board equipped with a forward facing video camera to record fish and general reef topography. Tow diver surveys are good to obtain a general description of a large area, assess large-scale disturbance, for example, bleaching, and assess general distribution of abundance patterns of selected macroinvertebrates, for example, crown of thorns or giant clams. They are best for covering large distances at low levels of taxonomic resolution. Number three is random swim. For site selection, this involves a snorkel or scuba diver body pair selecting suitable sites for monitoring, for example, checking if there is a sufficient continuous reef for transects. General description of the site with semi-quantitative counts of various coral reefs. Okay, When we survey benthic communities, for example, coral reef, we have numerous methods. We have line intercept transect, point intercept transect, video transect, visual quadrat, and permanent photo quadrat. Okay. In DNR, we mostly use the line intercept transect to determine the percentage cover of benthic communities. It can be used on its own or in combination with other methods such as quadrats. The LIT or line intercept transect is the standard method recommended to determine percentage covered or cover and colony size for management level and monitoring. So the information obtained here are percentage cover of benthic communities, for example, hard coral, soft coral, sponges, algae, rock, dead coral. Medium to detailed information can be collected from growth forms to family, genus, or species level depending on objectives of or expertise available. Growth form data can describe reef topographic changes but with less detail when the chain with or than the chain intercept transect. Okay, in addition, another common method that we used in our office here in PENRO-Guimaras is the point intercept transect. It is also used to determine the percentage cover of the benthic community. It differs from the LIT or the line intercept transect in a manner that identification in PIT or point intercept transect is done every 25 centimeters of the transect line. Okay, so this is also indicated in our technical bulletin 2017 number 5. Okay, so for the macro invertebrates, belt transect is commonly used. This involves a pair of observers swimming along the belt transect and counting the target invertebrate species as well as special features of the reef, for example, such as coral health or physical damage. Abundance estimates of key macroinvertebrates as well as measure of physical damage and coral health. A single survey provides a snapshot of the status of the target key macroinvertebrate and impact on a regional or global scale. To achieve higher precision, to detect local changes, teams can make more replicates and increase the monitoring frequency. Okay, so for fish assessment, we have here toad diver or manta tow, also used fish roving diver technique, fish belt transect, fish stationary plot survey, and fish rapid visual census, and then the butterfly fish method and fish spawning aggregation method. Okay, so for fish assessment, rapid fish visual census is commonly used to determine species diversity. It is also useful to determine with or which species to include in long-term monitoring. This is actually also another method that we used here in our office. So observers conduct this survey at a constant speed for a fixed time instead of measuring the area with transect tapes. The method is useful to estimate relative abundance and is based on the assumption that the probability of encountering a species increases with its abundance. Therefore, the more common species, the sooner the observer is likely to encounter it. The information obtained in this kind of method is species diversity and relative abundance presented as frequency of occurrence. Now, knowing the threats, knowing the techniques on how to monitor the reef ecosystem, what are the ways that we can protect the reef ecosystem? Okay, so we've just here lined 10, no? 10 ways to protect the coral reefs according to NOAA. So we have here choose sustainable seafood. No? We need to make sure that a food that we consume is aside from healthy, it should be sustainable. Conserve water. The less water you use, the less runoff and wastewater that eventually find their ways back into the ocean. Volunteer in local beach or reef cleanups. No? This month is an environment month. Kung hindi lang dahil kay COVID, we should have implemented our coastal and underwater cleanups. However, due to this pandemic, we are prohibited to do so. But if allowed, volunteer in those local beach or reef cleanup. If you don't live near the coast, get involved in protecting your watershed. Another thing is corals are already a gift. Don't give them as presents. No, it takes corals decades or longer to create reef structures. So leave them on the reef. Meaning to say, do not remove them. It has been a long campaign that there shall be no collection of reef or corals from the sea. Okay. Long-lasting light bulbs are a bright idea. Energy-efficient light bulbs reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change is one of the leading threats to coral reef survival. So, when choosing light bulbs, make sure that we are using energy efficient light bulbs. If you dive, don't touch. Coral reefs are alive. Stirred up sediment can smother corals. Sabi nga nila, take nothing but photos, no? Leave nothing but footprints. Don't touch any corals when you go diving or when you go snorkeling. Check your sunscreen active ingredients. Seek shade between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. Use ultraviolet protection factor, no, or UPF sunwear, and choose sunscreens with chemicals that don't harm marine life. Another thing is be a marine crusader. In addition to picking up your own trash, carry away the trash that others have left behind. Be a responsible tourist, be a responsible local in your local beaches. Don't send chemicals into our waterways. Nutrients from excess fertilizer increases algae growth that blocks sunlight to corals. Lastly, practice safe boating. Anchor in sandy areas away from coral and seagrasses so that the anchor and chain do not drag on nearby corals. So help save the reef. We should help the reef now. Madamo nga salamat.